We're going to start our sessions again with debate number 3, a European Health Authority, with a big question mark. Can I ask Dominique Le Guludec and Alrik Rutter to come to the table? Our moderator will be Jacques Belghiti. Hello. Hello, Dominique. Hello, Alrik. So the theme for this round table is a European Health Authority with a question mark. So we'll start with the idea that this is something that should be desired. I'm going to question you especially about assessment and recommendation. Dominique, you represent the Health Authority. Yes, this is one way of presenting the problem. What is important to determine is the scope that we want to set up, and each agency, each authority, each national authority has very different scopes. We all assess products, devices, acts in relation to their reimbursement, but at the High Health Authority, we have other missions. We have to assess and measure the quality of healthcare in healthcare establishments, and also in social and medical establishments. We have to certify hospitals and healthcare professionals, and then we have to provide best practice recommendations, and we have to help with change, support change, help with professional cooperation. So we have a very broad scope of action. Each country organizes its healthcare system differently, so we need to know what we want to share. That's the first question. Alrik.
My institution.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a kind of a little bit different of the big institution of AJS, even if we are always called sister institutions, where I'm a little bit proud of, because we are European, as I might say. We have in Germany, it's a difference. We have the difference between the decision maker and the HTA body, the IQWiG, the Institute of Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare. This is the independent HTA body. So we are independent by law, and our task is to provide objective HTA, objective evidence, the point of evidence as it is at the moment, to the decision maker. So we do on drugs the early benefit assessment, for example. We do HTA on medical devices and medical interventions. We have to provide evidence-based information for the public, and we are assessing clinical guidelines in order to identify the standard of healthcare, for example, for chronic programs like disease management programs and whatsoever. So we do not do the guidelines; we assess them in order to identify this point. The decision maker is the Federal Joint Committee. This is consisting of the administrative body in Germany, which are the physicians, the statutory health insurance, and the hospitals and the patients, not to forget the patients. They do all the decisions, especially on reimbursement, basing on the evidence we deliver. So we have to be the independent body. We are not allowed to be taken to court, for example. We have to provide very thorough, high quality, high methodological paper, all these things, in order to fulfill this kind of task. So it's a little bit a kind of a difference between this big institution, which takes almost everything under one roof, and this very separated two institutions.
I think, however, that we do share some very important aspects, so the scientific character of the assessment and independence with respect to the regulator, and that's what you have in Germany. So there are principles that are very similar, I would say. So we're talking about what's shared between France and Germany, what is the same, but we don't just have France and Germany in Europe. So one question that we might ask is, do you have the tools? We'll just focus on assessing devices and systems and medication. Do you believe that you have enough tools, the right kind of tools, to share evaluations, to share assessment work? Independence obviously is an important aspect. You agree with that. You're both independent. Both your authorities are independent. But what about the other organizations as well, the other agencies? And a second point concerning the assessment, the HTA assessment, do you have a shared vision? Is there a shared organization? Shall I start? Well, I believe, first of all, well, let me come back to what was said earlier on. France wasn't much of a driving force between what was happening at European level. But let's take a state. We have a network today of European agencies assessing products. So it's still based on a kind of a voluntary basis. Countries either buy into it or not, they're members or not. So there is experimentation financed by the European Commission. We are already at stage 3. This has made it possible to make progress in terms of what we do together, what is shared. Saying that France is hesitant, that's not true. We've been very operational. The HAS has taken part in 2/3 of the assessments of drugs. We are leaders when it comes to meeting up with industrialists, having learning dialogues at European level. And the director of the HAS assessment is vice president of the executive board of the state, and with a very strategic position when it talks about when it comes to the long term. So we are very much ahead of the game. However, we need clear rules so that the French citizens know that we're not destroying what we already have at national level. Can you be more specific? Yes, let's be more specific. Well, today, as has been said, the European Commission talks and votes on a text. The European Council is also a point of reference. We don't entirely agree with the text because there's a lack of clarity with respect to certain aspects. In other words, what about national competition? We believe that all scientific assessments should be brought together at European level. But what the Americans and Anglo-Saxons called PRESA, appreciation according to reimbursement, that's something that's very dependent on the healthcare system, on the healthcare to be reimbursed, or what still has to be paid. So that part needs to stay at national level. So, Alrik, not much divergence there for you, no?
Well, on the one hand, I agree totally with Dominique on that. But up to the moment up to now, there is a lot of divergence here, especially if you look to the different countries, and we have not been overcome this at the moment. Even if we work scientifically together very well in the European network, there is a high diversity in quality, for example, in the different assessment. There's a high diversity in understanding how to use different assessment. There's a high diversity in understanding in the independency, like conflict of interest, integration of industry or whatsoever. So I do think that we need a lot of time to work on that. And then and if you see the example of Germany, since 2011, we have established a very well evaluated assessment of drugs, the early benefit assessment. This works perfectly in Germany. So the drug is on the market, available for the patient at the moment when it's on the market, for example. So we are very early. This is a diversity between many other countries. This works fine. But of course, there is a difficulty to step back from this activity and this kind of this example. We need some more time on that. Now you might say, we have used already so much time because this European network is trying to get some sustainability here. It starts in 2006, and I know I've been with them from the beginning and also was included in preparing the first proposal. And many say, no, it's so negative. Even the Commission and the Parliament says, no, we have to do. I opposite that. We should not jump up the stairs. We should take step by step. And we are half of it, of course. The EMA needed 25 years. So we are, how many did we? Not less than 20, 10 something. So there is a lot of things to discuss and to prepare. And as I can see that especially the scientific reports which are done now at the European level are much better and much higher quality than those which had been done in the last project. And now a last word to the mandatoriness of use of these projects. I'm against this mandatoriness, because if you urge me to use something and not to check it and not to change it, even if it's bad, then I have to use even bad quality, for example. But it is much more easier if you provide good things, good quality, which are used voluntarily. They will be used, for sure. The usage is continually going up through Europe from the European HTA reports. From Joint Action 2, there had been 2 or 3 countries, I do think, which try to use these reports. And now there are even more who even use the full report and not only a part of it. That's because of the quality. They know what to get, and then they use it by themselves. And they're not urged to do that. And I do think this is the best way to step forward.
Bien.
Okay, we have the impression that we've got common points in terms of HTA, but there are aspects that are difficult. For example, in medical data, so for certain agencies. So the second element, there are divergences when it comes to comparators.
Oui, ça, c'est ce que disiez de...
And as Dominique was saying, the healthcare organization and the infrastructure of the country may mean that sometimes they put more or less. What do both of you envisage? While Germany and France have a fairly common vision, how do you think you will be able to overcome these national differences in infrastructure, for example? Well, I think we must be clear in terms of the principles. We shouldn't reduce the quality of the expertise. I think there are many agencies of a very good level in Europe, and they can work together. We should combine what is worth combining. Any innovations, for example, or products that have a real organizational impact, that are very disruptive, that meet really an unmet need. We need to choose what we're doing, because these are very complex processes that require more time than the national processes. So we have to be prudent in terms of the exact scope of what we're doing. And we shouldn't abandon, as you said, the quality of what we're doing nationally, whether it's in France or Germany. This demand for independence and transparency as well, the managing conflicts of interest, the separation between the regulator and the assessor in view of reimbursement. For example, we cannot put the IMEA and the HT Baudir together, whereas certain European countries do so. These are very different cultures. In France, we wanted to separate things, and that's our culture. What's happening now, it's a good way of testing. We do common assessments. We have early dialogue now, and we're also going to be working on medical devices next month. It's starting up. There are already 2 medical devices that have applications. We are moving forward step by step. This is the way we should do things. If we want to go too fast, because there's such a difference between countries such as Germany and France and, well, Great Britain that have assessment agencies and other countries that don't have these assessment agencies, it will be difficult. I agree with you. We need to go up the stairs slowly. Now, for medico-economics, you have some countries that use the NICE or the QALY index, and then we have France where it's not totally both. But we only do scientific analysis so far, not economic analysis up until now, but things are changing among the countries. There's a medico-economic vision that will be built gradually, I think.
That's so nice that I agree with most of
Bon,
them.
très bien. Non, mais on va essayer.
I might, no,
Juste une petite... Ouais.
We can add some things, especially if you ask about the development and how we can go further. For example, if you go for the process, we are just starting to get all the data. we are very good on the pathway and on the discussion between the EMA and the HTA people and how to get data, how to release data, how to free data and open them for the HTA people. We are starting with the early dialogue, which I do think is a very important mean to improve the scientific collaboration and the usage of the reports thereafter. Yeah, because then we really know what we need, and then we can send the signal to those who do the clinical trials what the hell they should do and provide, and we will get the data from the regulators and later on. So this is also very important in this background. Third point is the idea, and what is a little bit less up to now done in the European activities. That's the capacity and capability building. I do know that there are everywhere the scientists are really good, but they has to be taught how to do the HTA and how to do the HTA at a very high level. And here I do think that we have to, if we shouldn't remain in the European bowl, I might say, we should look over the bowl and we should go to the international activities who are very broad and very far already in this kind of capability and capacity building in order to work with them together on this level. And there you also see the HTA scene and the HTA thought. Those who are doing HTA, they are thinking internationally already. They're not just sitting in the national, they have to serve the national decision maker, of course. This is the one thing. But they also, since many years, are very broad and try to get the things out of the colleagues internationally, all over the world. So I do think we are on a very good ground.
I would add that we are in a very particular context, a very rapid innovation, and we see products arriving in a phase of knowledge that's quite preliminary, with what we call a very high level of uncertainty. The market authorizations in Europe are given for very broad population, but they usually say, well, the risk-benefit ratio is good and we can use this product. But replacing this within a therapeutic strategy, what is the real added value of the product? This is not done in a market authorization. So in a situation of uncertainty where we have these precocious studies that are arriving in view of a reimbursement, I think for these applications it's very useful to work together. Yes, this is indeed where there's a need to have a scientific approach, an academic approach that's a little higher when we need to focus on these products and at the same time move faster. Dominique, in your career, you had a university academic career. Are you comfortable working for the HTA? There's no divergence, you're not uncomfortable, you're not disturbed by arriving in an environment where the value or the hierarchy of a journal. What do you mean? Well, someone told me that in the HTA, the impact factors don't play a role. Well, I read an article in the New England Journal last week where I wondered how they did that. So we can still have a critical eye on scientific journals. We've learned that as academics. That doesn't bother me because the goal isn't the same. I worked in an INSERM research team. I worked in a hospital team where we wanted to move forward in partnership with industries. I think it's a partnership. The question is different here. The question is our healthcare system that wants to be equitable, that wants to be egalitarian and show solidarity, which has one of the smallest patient contributions of Europe, should we finance such and such a product? So we do have a different viewpoint, but that doesn't bother me at all. I think it's an honor for our country to have this viewpoint.
Oncologist, I'm just a physician, and a physician is not an academic, and I'm not very, so I'm happy in HA. No, that's just joking about that. Coming back to this, to the high level papers, this of course for HTA is not interesting at all. That's right. But I would like to add what you said, very much the high importance of the information management, which is a part of our different institutions, is normally not seen. They are not seen as high scientists, and they are, because they have the task to check everything, the mean, the fake, the whatsoever, and to put this together in a way that the scientists can really work with it. And this is something we have to look at, and we really have to support it. And I know that HRS has a very good department on that. We try to be as good as them, and others has to be educated on that. There's just as you want to know something about how to deal with high-level journals and this point.
Pour ce qui est des sociétés savantes,
For learned societies, I know who you're referring to now. Yes, sometimes we do have differences in judgment because we don't have the same goal. We have everyone sit around the table, all of the professionals concerned and the patients, and this does give a different viewpoint. And I think the patients really force everyone to feel more responsible. In France, we're a bit timid about this inclusion of the patients. Things are changing at the HAS. We have them in all of our commissions, but we see that this is still lacking, and we're moving forward, but it's still a bit weak. And when you put everyone around the table, yes, it's harder to find conclusions, but it's important to make the first step. When science doesn't know everything, such as Lyme disease, when science doesn't know everything, this first step is already to make sure that there's no aberration in terms of treatment, and that we set some simple rules for GPs who are going to see patients arriving and say, I have a chronic Lyme disease patient. Well, we didn't know whether this existed. Sometimes the scientific knowledge is not sufficient. Some of the tests aren't sufficient. And people say, what do I do with this patient? Well, we give them some simple rules. And we say, you treat them for 28 days, and then if that doesn't work, then you go to an expertise center, so that we no longer have these aberrations with patients who were treated 6 months with antibiotics, or charlatans on the internet, quacks really on the internet. So we're trying to make things progress pragmatically. Yes, you're right. We're not really in the shoes of a learned society, nor in the shoes of the patients or the patients' associations. But what we see is, what kind of progress can we make today, step by step? Yes, but between not being completely in the same shoes and not walking in the same direction, there's a difference. There was a real divorce recently between the learned societies and the recommendations of an agency. So we can ask ourselves if we're not twisting in two opposite directions. The HAS in France must be respected by scientists. Yes, of course. But scientists don't need the HAS when recommendations are simple to be made. When there's a consensus, they don't need us. Our added value is when there are difficulties and disagreements. That's where our added value comes into play. So, yes, okay, this is where we need to take our responsibility if we think that this will help and make things progress for patients.
Accept HTA bodies. I do not understand your question. We do science, don't we? So in this, even the high-level HTA reports are scientifically accepted by each of them. Of course, we have to translate the answers, the recommendations in a language the one who is reading and using it is going to understand. Is it the physician, is the patient, and is it the decision maker? I think 90% of the German decision makers do not understand the scientific talk of an HTA report. We have to translate it, and we have to give it in German, of course, or in France. I'm sorry. So this is I'm not understanding your question in this way.
Moi, je crois que c'est un point.
Well, I think this is an important point. These learned societies speak a specialist language, whereas the authorities speak to doctors and to the population. And to the regulator, yes, to the decision maker, yes, indeed. So yes, recommendations are your job. And so students use these recommendations from the HAS, and they almost use them as a basis for their training. But I'd like to come back to this problem. From time to time, we shouldn't separate things too much from the scientific authorities. There were issues of links of interest or conflicts of interest. Don't you think sometimes you may have conflicts of interest with patients' associations? Or, well, let me reassure you, we have 17 disputes underway. For the Lyme disease, it was patients who have we have a conflict with the patients' associations because they think we're not going far enough. So, you know, it really depends on what glasses you're wearing, how you see the situation.
Non, non, mais c'est fondamental. Hein. C'est fondamental.
Yes, that's fundamental. It's fundamental.
Mais
Of course, also to deal with patient-relevant endpoints, for example, starting with the endpoints and ending with the evaluation through the patients, and also having the patients sitting in the decision-making body. So,
De toute façon, la médecine avance.
Medicine is always moving forward with baby steps. The story is not over. We're trying to also give more means and resources for research, and we also want registers, patient registers, so that we have less holes in the science, and so that a few years down the road we can find an agreement with these patients' associations. That's the goal. You think 3 years from now you will succeed in having the professionals agree with the recommendations of the HAS? Well, the recommendations only say to turn over the turn over the hand to experts if you don't know. Often patients come to see a doctor and they think they have chronic Lyme disease, and only 10% of the time this is true. 80% of the time it's not true. They must go and see expert teams who will then address them to the right specialist. That's all we're saying in terms of recommendations.
you're talking now about the physicians, or you're talking now about the decision makers? The physicians should work after the rules of the evidence-based medicine. And if you have evidence-based medicine, then evidence have the same weight as the experience and the knowledge of the physician as the needs of the patient. And it is the art of the physician to put all these things together. And I ask from each physician, he should know the evidence, and then he should do his art. So this is kind a difference, and I can see, and when I go teaching in university, especially for physicians, they are very happy about HCA reports, for example, because they give them the opportunity to get a big bunch of evidence put together very thoroughly, and they know that there's high quality behind, so they do not have to recheck it, so that they can go to the final recommendation immediately and put this into their decision making. So this is just a kind of teaching them, and I do not think that we have to convince them.
Et puis, il ne faut pas oublier que l'evidence-based medicine.
Yes, we shouldn't forget that evidence-based medicine is one half of science, and the other half is the experience of professionals and the patient's experience. That's evidence-based medicine. You shouldn't take only the part that interests us. Science doesn't always know everything. I'm still looking at this from the viewpoint of European recommendations. That was the topic. Yes, that is even more complicated for products. There is a worldwide organization, the GIN, which is a network of agencies that make common recommendations. 54 countries belong to this network, where they have a congress every year. There are over 1,500 common recommendations. But you can imagine very well that a recommendation of best practices is even harder to reach, with the infrastructures that you have, the patients' lives that can vary, the patient's culture that varies from one country to another. So it is more complicated. And then the assessment of the evolution of the recommendations is very fast. So yes, recommendations, we can maybe pool them with other European countries, but let's be honest, it is more difficult than the products.
Some might say, if we go for recommendation, and there we have to think about different points. The clinical guidelines have two main kind of recommendation. There's the level of evidence, which shows the evidence which is seen, and there's the grade of recommendation, which is given by the experts. Both at the clinical guideline, that differs from HTA, have the same weight. It's not lower evidence that the grade of recommendations, the grade of recommendations are not lower evidence. Why? Because we have to have a state of practice for healthcare, even if there is no evidence at all. Therefore, we need this in order to treat the patients. But this is a difference between clinical guidelines and HTA. But we do, for example, that's why we assess clinical guidelines and make a clinical guidelines synopsis from evidence-based guidelines. Because we do not have evidence for everything. But if we, for example, go for chronic programs, disease management programs, we have to look from the start of the disease until the rehabilitation. And we have to give some kind of recommendation for each part. So this is why the decision maker takes clinical guidelines as a background for his decision, even knowing that there is lower evidence. Our art must be to translate understandable for the decision maker that this is not that the probability, if you have just a recommendation or lower evidence, is low, and what he can do with his answer. So this is tricky, but it is necessary, and therefore clinical guidelines are extremely important. But clinical guidelines are guidelines and not directives. You have to think about that.
Il met l'accent sur un point important.
He's focusing on a very important point that Health 22 is intending to also. It's the whole path, the pathway, the health treatment pathway with socio-medical aspects taken into account, the treatment of the patient, but it helps to break down the sector. In France, anyway, I'm not sure if it's in all countries the same. But these recommendations, the more we proceed, the more they become pathway guides that take into account the whole treatment pathway. But can they be shared or not? Can they be applied to everyone or not? That's the question. Some parts can be shared because, thank goodness, we have some exact sciences that do guide us. Not everywhere, of course, but then taking it into account in the local fabric of healthcare, the attitudes between the professionals and the patients can be different. So we need to get people to take ownership of this on a national level. Even if there are some parts that are shared, people have to have a cultural appropriation at a national level of all of this.
With the cultural appropriation, and I really heard also today that the social diversity has to be protected, what the commissioner said, and I was very happy about that, even if I also heard that the future for healthcare is the European one, and otherwise it won't exist anymore. So this is this describes exactly the role of HTA in between.
On va voir ce que la Commission européenne.
So a European agency that's not going to be created by tomorrow, no, but not in the near future. But let's take those steps and let's make sure that they're lasting steps. Let's establish clear rules, and then we'll be able to move on to the next stage. We must achieve this. We're very much in favor of this, and we're a real driver in this construction. But let's do it with clear rules, without any obligations for the member states. So they can use the evaluations that they want. They can complete them if they would like to, and let's move forward step by step, and we will succeed.
Good path now. We are really stepping forward even faster than I thought, and we shouldn't disturb that now with too harsh and ideas and like this mandatoriness and whatsoever. So better support this a little bit more, especially if I look at those countries who need some kind of HTA and they really want to do it and have different problems. Even other problems like availability of drugs is something where we also can help from the European side, and we should see this a little bit more global. Even the HTA idea a little bit more with different points and not just the HTA.
Très bien, on a fini. Ben, merci beaucoup.
We're finished. Thank you.
Si je comprends bien, il va la...
So if I've understood correctly, they want to take their time. So let's push to accelerate this.